happy birthday and cake and everything already.
We have about 5 more birthdays to celebrate tomorrow. So we had Anna and Claire today.
I'll make y'all some oxtail soup. No.
Danielle's son. And then we had Deanna's birthday was just a couple days
How many minutes do we have for each?
About 7,
Okay.
10 minutes.
All
Does
right.
that work?
Okay,
Does that?
that's
Can you hear me
fine.
on this mic? Is that
That's fine.
a little closer? Is this right? Is that good? Yeah. Okay. Scooch in. Get close.
I know that song, Closer Than Close.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thanks for being here. I'm really excited that you're all here for this event on frontline struggles around the right to water. My name is Shally Gupta Barnes. I'm with the Kairos Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice. And tonight we are here to learn and to hear about struggles that are being waged around this country for the right to water. In many ways, it's kind of unbelievable that in a country flanked by 2 of the world's oceans, with thousands of rivers and lakes and the largest freshwater body of water in the water in the world, that access to water, access to clean water, is even an issue. But there are millions of people in this country who do not have water in their homes, or the water that they have is contaminated by toxins or industrial pollution. We'll have some videos and maps that will show up over here. This map over here is just shows the number, some of the 14 million homes around the country that don't have affordable water. 14 million households don't have affordable water in this country, and that number is set to triple in the next 5 years if current patterns continue. There's another 4 million households that are exposed to lead in this country, among other toxins. This kind of really intricate and beautiful map shows the network of waterways, rivers, and lakes that crisscross across this country. So if we think that we're far away from one of those water contamination sites, we need to rethink that idea. We're all very connected to these crises, and every single one of us is going to feel it at one point or another. While some lack clean water, others lack access to water infrastructure, sanitation infrastructure, leaving them with mold or raw sewage in their homes, flooding in their streets, and a whole number of health issues that we haven't seen in decades in this country. Our speakers here today are going to tell us how this happened in different places around the country, in Detroit, in Flint, in Denmark, South Carolina, and elsewhere. And we're also going to hear about why this fundamental right is under attack. We all know that we can't live without water. So where water is being taken away, we're effectively saying that those people don't deserve to live. And this is part of a bigger assault on the poor and working class in this country that's been going on for decades, and not just here, but around the world. The forces behind these attacks would have us believe that if we just conserved our water, if we took shorter showers, maybe flushed every other time or something, we could stave off the climate crisis we're all facing. Meanwhile, they'll invest and insure pipelines, but not people. They'll continue using millions of tons of water for fracking, return that poisoned water to our ground wells, and then lobby against universal health care and good jobs. So with us tonight to confront these arguments and these forces, we have Maureen Taylor from Detroit, the state chair of Michigan Welfare Rights. We have Abby Billinghurst, who's on the ground from Denmark, South Carolina. We have Claire McClinton from the Flint Democracy Defense League, and Mary Grant from Food and Water Watch in D.C. So please join me in welcoming our amazing panel today. And how we're going to use our time, we'll hear from each of them, and then they'll have a chance to ask each other questions about anything, and then we'll also have a chance to hear questions from everyone who's here tonight. So I want to start off actually with Maureen. Maureen's a lifelong soldier in the war against the poor. She's a state chair, as I mentioned, of the Michigan Welfare Rights Organization and has been working nonstop for decades to make sure families have their electricity and heat on, have water in their homes, and their children safe and sound. She's one of the most brilliant voices on the right to water and welfare rights in the country. And it's not just me who's saying that. You'll hear her, but I also wanted to share this short video of Maureen really just telling the truth about what's so wrong about how we understand the right to water today.
Oh, look at that hairstyle. It's wicked, ain't it? Look at that. Wicked.
We have some pretty great videos of actually, all of our struggles today. So, whoops. We'll get to it in a minute.
I want to bring in Hank Winchester, a reporter who's been covering this story from the very beginning from NBC affiliate WDIV.
Shouldn't have done it. He should have known.
Maureen Taylor is state chair of the Michigan
already
Welfare
mad.
Rights Organization.
I was already
Thank you
mad.
both for being with me. Hank, let me start with you. Michigan's Department of Human Services has been overwhelmed with complaints about financial assistance in this crisis. How many people are at risk in Detroit's water crisis here, Hank?
Oh, Craig, we're talking about thousands of people and the number growing every day. Here's why. Because the water department is continuing to shut off water to those who have these huge outstanding bills. Some of these people have a desperate need. They simply cannot afford to pay the bill. They need help from state agencies like you mentioned, DHS, but there are other people, and this is where it gets controversial, who simply don't want to pay the water bill, who'd rather spend money on cable. It's also important to note that the water department has come out and said, listen, we're willing to make a deal. If you want to pay, set up a payment plan or pay a portion of your water bill, we'll turn you back on, but you simply can't ignore the water department.
How serious is a potential health hazard in this crisis?
Before I answer that, let me say shame on Hank. Shame on him for putting that lie and that myth and that disinformation out on the air. To suggest that people don't want to pay for a water bill is scandalous. What is at stake here, young man?
You don't believe that there are people who don't want to pay the bill?
I'm answering the question. I'm answering the question. What is at stake here is that there are tens of thousands of low-income families who cannot pay rising water bill costs. The cost of living is going up, the chances of living are going down, and we got these reporters out here like this guy that's just standing on the side of people that have money. Yes, there are bills that are being contested, but what we're talking about is 2 months being behind, $150 or more is what you owe, but the same kind of situation and the same kind of threat is not being made to these folks that are rich, golf courses,
You know what?
and folks that have millions and whatnot of dollars. It's an outrage what I hear here this morning.
Maureen, I'm glad you did bring that part up because while residents have been shut off, Joe Louis Arena, where the Detroit Red Wings, where the hockey team plays, they owe a little bit more than $82,000, I understand, in water bills. The Detroit Lions Stadium Ford Field owes more than $55,000. Golf courses, as you just mentioned, owned by the city of Detroit, owe more than $400,000.
They're not being threatened with shut-off.
The state of Michigan,
They're not being
biggest
told
bill,
that your service is going to
$5
be cut
million
off.
for water at state fairgrounds, as I understand it.
We have been told many of those now have cleared their balances, but it's important to point out here, and we've made it very clear from day one. We understand, and of course I understand as a reporter who's worked in this city for 14 years, that we know that there are people that have tough financial situations.
Shame on you.
Look, and you've talked to these people. People have said to you, you know what, I've got the money, I just don't want to pay for water.
Right, I mean, we've heard
No, you
stories on
haven't
both
talked to
sides of the
anybody
issue.
like that.
What would you like to see happen, Maureen?
In 10 seconds, I can't tell you what I want to happen because I don't want to speak those words. But the next time you invite me to be here, let's have some truth and a fair exchange as opposed to Hank, who doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Gobble up all the time. I'll talk.
So, Maureen.
Okay. I bring you all greetings from Michigan Welfare Rights, and as you can see, we've been involved in the fight for access to water for quite some time. After that particular interview with that guy, one of the things that he told me was that you will never be on this particular channel or network again, because if you diss me, that means we're not going to ever bring you back. So I told him that's probably best. Because if I ever was able to get back on this station again and you were in the same room, it would turn out differently. All right, right after that, he was offered a job called Help Me Hank. Yeah, and that's what he needed. In Detroit, we have been arguing and fighting with the water department for a number of years. And it became critical right around February or March of 2014. And that's when we started to get a number of telephone calls into welfare rights where people were saying, the water department is at my door, I've got a bill that says shut off. I'm getting telephone calls. Somebody has to help us because we can't do anything. And the calls were 20, 25 calls an hour. And so we knew something was going on. So we began to look for folks in the city of Detroit in the administration to ask some questions. And that's when we found out. We had finished with this so-called lying-ass bankruptcy, all of these things that keep going on to try to indicate that the city of Detroit was not solvent. We couldn't manage our own problems. And so one lie after the other. Emergency managers show up. If you didn't know what that is, you go to channel 50 at night and look up Nazi, and then emergency manager is what the definition was. So all of these things were going on. And at that time, 59,990 addresses were on a list due to be shut off. And what we're talking about, again, 59,990. What we're talking about, if you were $150 in arrears or if you were 2 months behind in your bill payments, you could have your service shut off. Well, since that time, we have been engaged with the United Nations. Since that time, we've been engaged with international forces from all over the earth. We have reached out and tried to shame the water department as best as we could, but it's not possible to shame a fascist. You can't shame them. It doesn't matter what you do or what you say. You cannot appeal to their good side because they don't have a good side. So here we are, like was already said, we live in a state surrounded by Great Lakes. 5 of them, and we have some of the purest water on earth, but we cannot find a way for low-income, working-class people to access water. The answer for sure is to talk about water affordability, but you can't raise that in Michigan. Now, we developed a water affordability plan back in 04 and 05. Sent it down to the Detroit City Council. They approved it. The mayor approved it. Everybody approved it. We can't move it past bureaucracy. And since 2014, we sent that same plan to Chicago, and the new Chicago mayor now is implementing a water affordability plan. We sent it to Baltimore. They're implementing a water affordability plan. Same thing we gave them. We sent it to Philadelphia. We sent it to Durango. I sent a copy to my cousin down in Cleveland. We've sent this doggone water affordability plan all over the United States of America, and we cannot get it accessed in Michigan where we live. I'm going to say this last thing to you. It does not matter, and I've always had this position, but it does not matter what you say to these capitalists when they have their heart and mind set on taking affordable housing. They don't want affordable housing to exist anymore. They write something in pen and paper, label it approved, label it official. I guess they go get official notices from wherever, and they stamp it and it becomes official because they say it is. They don't want you to have access to water. They create a narrative. You don't want to pay your water bill because you prefer to pay your cable bill. Huh? I don't know anybody that likes to live in a house without water. So, I was doing something else. Okay. All right, so once they come up with a plan that in order to maximize their own profits, they have to label you as something. So when you label a group of people, you know, they got money, it's in the ceiling, they're hiding it up under the carpet, it's in the upholstery, and all this kind of stuff. Then if you say that stuff over and over and over again, and bad things start to happen that we all know are wrong, folks won't say anything. That's how you get them statements. The only good Indian is a dead Indian. That's how you get that stuff. Welfare recipients, those mothers, they keep having babies. That's the problem. There's something the matter with these Arabs, you know, and they always look suspicious. And of course, Jewish people, you know, you can't trust them no further than you can see them. If you're from South America, well, you know, I'm sure you're part of the Medellin cartel. And Africans are the ones that created AIDS because they was having sex with monkeys. So you got to create these stories, and you got to repeat them and repeat them. Factory workers just too greedy. What? Nobody's making the kind of money that Mary Barrow was making, $22 million, but a factory worker is wrong. So I'm just going to end right there because, you know, it's clear to me. Unless we're prepared to slap the crap out of these mother scorchers, they're not going to change. You cannot convince them that what they're doing is wrong. And at the end of the day, we have to organize a new world. Now, they can go with us nice, or they can go with us begrudgingly, or they can stand in the way, but they only have three choices. And my position is go with us now, or stay where you are on the ground. My name is Maureen Taylor. I serve as state chairperson of Michigan Welfare Rights. And thank you so very much for your attention.
Thank you, Maureen. And we'll have time for questions and to hear more from Maureen and others after we hear from everybody else as well. So I wanted to ask Abby, we hear Abby Billinghurst from Denmark, South Carolina. Abby's been living in Denmark for the past 15 years, and Denmark is facing this water crisis. They've been facing it for decades, in fact, but it just kind of broke through where these toxins were released into the water, and the toxins are so powerful that if they just touched your skin, you could, you know, they would say that if it just touched your skin, you might get cancer, and now it's in the water. And so there's a group of people that's been organizing against that. Again, we have a short video to just show a little bit about what's going on in Denmark. And one of the other leaders from Denmark who Abby knows well, Deanna Barry, is featured in this video. So we'll get a chance to hear from Deanna as well.
And you're out of touch with your people, your sympathy and your empathy kind of goes away.
Y'all, come on, send them on. Get dog at the bottom.
Yeah. In Denmark, for the last 10 years, a chemical called halocyan has been used to disinfect our city's drinking public water. What's happened is over the last 3 years, a lot of citizens have been complaining, have a lot of concerns, a lot of issues that were passed away to the side and kind of ignored. It may last for a little while, but eventually there's a stopping point. And we are the stopping point.
Yep, that's how it starts.
So I know that's familiar to others in the room, but Abby, could you tell us a little bit more about what's been going on in Denmark?
Okay, a lot of changed in Denmark for the last time you guys had met with Deanna.
Now she's working with the president campaign Tom Steyer. This caused her to pass the torch onto residents to carry an absence upon her campaign, and upon her campaign is over. Just for your records, the new lead for Denmark Citizen for Safe Waters is Ramilla Duncans and Shannon Gill. Abby, I'm one of the board members. The only thing that has changed in our fight for safe water here in Denmark is the fact that the role is now volunteer senior advisor. That's what Deanna's role is now. Her passion in the war is still uncontested. Now they have a pledge to advise residents on the way they may want to travel to overcome challenges and how to statistically create realistic solutions to the crisis. Denmark is still in a crisis. Local government officials are still combative with residents in trying to bring back the experts to trust to finish the work. DHEC, which is Department of Health and Environmental Control, said that the water was safe to drink. But we found out lately, we just found out there are other cities, other communities in South Carolina that has also used the same, the Holocene also.
Okay.
So now our war is out now to find out what other towns is using the same, has used this same chemical. Because the chemical itself is not for drinking, it's for pools and spas, so it's causing a problem now. We have a high kidney problem. The children are having problems, so it's really bad now. And the Holocene in the public is not for public drinking water. So we're quite possible into the release of South Carolina, in fact, to declare a state of emergency, which will take place soon. Deanna wants you guys to know that she's still working very hard to try to get this come to some kind of solution. She says now we had scientists that came in to Denmark who wanted to test the waters, and the mayor and the people wouldn't allow them to, told them no. But what happened is we do need someone to test the water because something is not wrong. Something is not right.
Of course.
So that's it.
All right.
So Claire McClinton is from Flint, Michigan. Claire's a retired auto worker with the UAW and has been fighting for labor rights, water rights, and democracy for decades. I know most of us in this room are familiar with the Flint crisis, but when moms in Flint saw that their water was brown, that their children's hair was falling out, they were breaking out in rashes, and acting differently, they organized, they marched, and they were told that it was okay, or it wasn't the water. Even though GM, when it complained about the water corroding its car parts, was able to switch to a different water source, these families and moms were told that there was nothing to be done for them.
See there?
Say that.
So with the Democracy Defense League, Claire is continuing to organize, speak out, and fight back. So I have, again, a little short video of Claire just telling us about the
I'm scared to see.
about what's been going on, and then so just give me a second here.
Which one?
No one ever laid down and dreamt that you would be in a fight for water. We can go to the gas station and fill up your car with lead-free gas. You can go to the hardware store and get a gallon of lead-free paint. But you can't go home and turn on your faucet and get a glass of lead-free water?
That's right.
It's going on 3 years.
Say that.
Municipal water.
I mean, it's just so sadly indicative of other places that I see across the nation. This is honestly quite sickening that in this supposed to be the richest, most powerful United States or something, we can't get clean water to our people. I mean, that's disgusting that we have children with lead poisoning.
Yes, Flint is paying some of the highest water bills in the country, and it's not fair.
We want Medicare for all impacted residents, regardless of age. We know what we need to get out of this crisis. Thank y'all very much. Thank
Okay, you're had to give it to Avi.
Okay. So I just want to lift up one thing that Claire said in that video, that they want Medicare for all. The demands that were coming out of Flint were around water, around health care, and they were around democracy. And so I actually want to ask you, Claire, how is it that you make those connections between water and democracy? I mean, what is that connection relationship, and how are you fighting for that in Flint?
Well, it's a long, complicated story, but in a nutshell, they could not steal and poison our water if they had not stolen our democracy first.
Right.
And the emergency manager system was the weapon of choice, the weapon of the day. It was the go-to method in which the state of Michigan, summarizing this for those of you who might not be familiar with the emergency manager law, a law that allowed the governor to dispatch an individual to a city or a school district. That individual had all power. They were dictators. They could disband contracts, including union contracts. They can hire and fire at will. They could take a city into bankruptcy, Detroit, through the power of the emergency manager. And in the process, their main vision was to go into these predominantly majority minority cities that had a lot of assets left over from the industrial period. The Detroit water system is the third largest water operation in the United States. That was one of the assets that the state and the corporate powers to be had their eye on, and they used the emergency manager to do it. Now, like we say, they sitting around a room figuring out, dog, how can we get a hold of that water?
That's right.
And they look, should we send an army in there? Nah, that's too messy. Should we, the emergency manager law. Send the emergency manager in there. The emergency manager in Detroit declares bankruptcy. They farm off so many of Detroit's assets. The emergency manager law was a tool to do some of the things that they talked about in this magazine. Do y'all believe it's a magazine called Privatization? I mean, really. Can you believe it? But this is the thing that's arresting about this privatization report published in Michigan, is this special report came out in 2001, in the winter of 2001. And let's look at a couple of the articles in there. One of it's called The Conventions of Privatization. They were talking about Cobo Hall, for whom the private bell tolls, bail out. Privatization should drive Detroit transportation. They privatized so much of the transportation and the maintenance departments for the buses and what have you. So they had a plan in place. Because water is the new oil. Water and technology, them too. The privatization scheme was implemented through emergency managers. The emergency manager had all power to privatize all these city assets, and it was only one power that the emergency manager did not have, and that is the emergency manager could not stop paying bond debts. Did y'all hear what I said? They have to pay bond. They can do everything else. Shut down this, shut down that, privatize this, privatize that, lay off workers, shred union contracts, all those things. Take the city into bankruptcy, Detroit. Detroit didn't go bankruptcy. The emergency manager took Detroit into bankruptcy. And the only reason, and you would ask the question, and then I'm going to wind up. If the emergency manager had all this power, what you go bankruptcy for? That's a good question. But the answer to that question is this. The Michigan State Constitution prohibits a city from not paying the pensions for the public employees. You got to go bankrupt. Because that's the only way you can get around the Michigan State Constitution. Because they were going after those pensions. And the Constitution don't allow you to do it. So one of the big issues, you all remember this, that were there, was about the what? Service employee pensions. And then they took a vote of the employees and asked them, do you want to go along with the deal like you implementing democracy? Or please. You know, you scared them and blackmailed them that if they didn't go along with it, you might not get a pension at all. But I didn't want to go into all of that like that, but I just wanted to set the table for the environment in which we was operating. And today, and I'm dedicating my remarks this evening to Lori Carter, 57 years old, Mary Watson was 43 years old, and Jasmine McBride, 29 years old, the youngest victim that we know of the Flint water crisis, all passed away last year to Legionella. I didn't say lead, to Legionella disease. And I encourage all your watchers to go to PBS Frontline and watch Flint's toxic water to get some of the background story on the condition we face today. But in the course of going on 6 years, the people in Flint, our community, along with the water warriors, we're getting a little bit more sophisticated about why we fighting. You know, we used to put posters of Governor Snyder up and say, you know, shoot him. We had a big target around there, and I mean, it was righteous indignation at Snyder and everything, but we had to begin to get a little bit more deeper and a little bit more class conscious. We had to learn about this capitalist system, and we had to learn that he who got the capital rule. And we have to learn, if we don't break the drive to seize the rights of water, we're going to wake up one day and see Lake Michigan, Inc., Lake Huron Incorporated, Lake Erie, LCC. This is what's driving the society that we're in today. So we got to get a little bit more broad-minded. We have got to do what Sun Tzu said and know our enemies and know our friends. And we've got to understand that we're in a system that's organized for the purposes of enhancing Wall Street and other corporations in order to maintain themselves while we dying. So I'm just going to give you a couple more bad news, and then I'm going to some more bad news. Only 10% of third graders passed the state test last year. 10%. There was a 56% jump in special ed. millions of dollars have been spent in court fighting the criminal charges, the few of them that has come up, and fighting the civil suits, the suits that's being filed by the residents to become made whole, to lay a foundation for recovery. The state has spent millions of dollars fighting in court. They even went to the U.S. Supreme Court resisting and fighting any compensation for what they did. And recently, some of you might have heard they dropped the criminal charges. So we don't know what's going to happen with that. But we're not going to leave it at that. We got some good news, too. Because we got some arenas we can fight in, too. Like General Baker told us, we got the legislature, the courts, and the streets. And we're going to use them to their fullest. Now, some good news that we're hearing is that there's been an implementation of the water affordability plan of 2017 in Philadelphia that still stands.
That's right.
Chicago getting ready to implement it. And where else, Maureen? Durango. And Baltimore.
Yeah.
Philadelphia has implemented and held theirs. Some good news from Toledo. They declared a Lake Erie Bill of Rights, and they passed that in the city of Toledo, and it gives standing to the lake. To the lake. The lake has rights. If you abuse the lake, if you poison the lake, you can be held criminally responsible. Isn't that wonderful? In Toledo, some water warriors there. And in Baltimore, and these are things that we can use as models to begin to spread the resistance to the privatization campaign that's being used to strip us of our water, both the quality and the cost. Baltimore last year prohibited the sale or the lease of the city's water and sewer system. It's illegal in Baltimore to purchase their water system. That is significant. And then we have a wave of strikes today. Our public is beginning to show signs of resistance. We've been asleep for some time.
That's right.
You know, but we got the young people out there with the climate change. We got UAW on striking, and teachers in Chicago and nurses in Chicago. And what I'm saying is all of these strikes are affronts and assaults and resistance to the attack on the quality of life. It's not for $1 and a dime no more.
That's right.
It's for the quality of life. So those are some good news, and so I'm going to leave it there. Okay.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Claire, that to give the perspective and then also remind us that there's a lot to fight for, a lot of fights being made that we have to, bring together, I think, in some ways to get everything that we need, to make sure we have it all. So I wanted to have a few minutes from Mary Grant. She's the director of the Public Water for All campaign at Food and Water Watch. And, there's a National Policy Institute that's done really critical work around the universal access to water. Mary, your work shows that this, and we all know that it isn't just Detroit and Flint and South Carolina and New Jersey that's kind of experiencing these crises. This is a real national crisis. How do you kind of put this in, can you share with us some perspective on what we're facing to add to the conversation?
Sure. So we're seeing three big interrelated threats to water that we've heard tonight. The affordability crisis, it's deepening across our country and it will only grow. The MSU, Michigan State University study found that this year, 2019, is when as many as 1 in 3 households will be unable to afford their bills. And when you get a bill you can't pay, what happens? You make trade-offs. Do you pay for your medicine or do you pay your water bill? Do you pay for food or do you pay your water bill? But often if you can't afford your bill, you don't pay it. You just can't afford to pay it. And that leads to, there's two really punitive methods of collections that utilities use across the country. One is shutoffs. We saw it in Detroit, those mass shutoffs, tens of thousands of households still to this day are being shut off each year. There's also homes are being lost, either through evictions or it's a tax sale. They'll come and seize your home and sell it at tax sale over water bills. The other threat we're seeing is toxic water. This is a national problem. It's lead in water. It's beyond Flint. It's beyond Newark. It's in our schools. It's nationwide. There's also these new emerging contaminants. One is PFAS, or per and polyfluorinated alkyl substances. It's industrial chemicals in the military contaminating our water across this country. And the more we test for it, the more we find. Michigan, again, is on the front lines of identifying this contamination. So we're seeing nationally industrial and agricultural pollution. And it's important to state that this is disproportionately impacting certain communities. There was a study done by the National Academy of Sciences, and they found that it's rural, low-income communities of color that are disproportionately have toxic water. So it's not surprising that Denmark has toxic water. It's these disproportionate impacts. It's environmental racism, where they cite industrial contamination sites, where the agricultural pollution is happening. The third looming threat over all of this is the privatization, financialization, and commodification of our water. So these Wall Street firms, corporations, multinationals, they want to seize control of our essential resources and our services. And they're going to exploit these crises for profit. They're going to exploit them and exacerbate them. We know that Nestle is going to bottle public water, and then we have Suez, Veolia, American Water seizing control of the actual services themselves. And when this happens, what happens? Rates go up, jobs are lost, and you lose that essential local control. So how did we get here? How did we get to this place where we have these national affordability crises, toxic water, and this looming threat of corporate control? Well, our systems are aging, that's true. Climate is changing, and this is making everything worse. But at the heart of it, one of the key pieces is austerity. There's cuts to federal support for our water systems. Since 1977, federal funding has been cut by 74%. On a per capita basis, that's an 82% drop. So what happened was Reagan came in, and he's had this model of trickle-down economics. So instead of investing directly in localities, he's giving tax cuts to corporations and the wealthy. So federal funding for our water peaked in 1977. Then when Reagan came in, he replaced the grant program, the construction grant program that built most of our wastewater systems across the country. He replaced that with a loan program. And then we saw steady decline through the 1990s under Clinton and the George Sr. And then we reached historic lows in federal support under George W. Bush. We got a big uptick with Obama's stimulus plan, but since then it's been pretty flat. That loss of local control, loss of federal funding. So when we talk about what is the solution, how can we have a national solution? The thing that we support at Food and Water Watch is reinvesting in our public water systems, restoring that federal commitment to safe water for all through the Water Act, introduced by Representative Brenda Lawrence from Detroit, which would roll back a tiny portion of the Trump administration's corporate income tax cuts to provide $35 billion a year to our water systems across the country. $35 billion is what the US EPA says that we need. So it's a matter of priorities. What are we doing? Are we giving tax cuts to corporations? Are we investing in our water? So the Water Act is growing every year, but political will for passing federal legislation just isn't there yet. So I think these local fights are where the change is happening and where we're actually seeing crises addressed with the urgency that they demand. So I just wanted to end. I live in Baltimore, and I really am proud of the work that folks in Baltimore have been able to do through the Baltimore Right to Water Coalition. So in 2015, we began fighting for the affordable water, and that was when they announced 20,000 households would lose water service. This was 2015, a year after Detroit had UN intervention and helped inform our knowledge of what this means. And then we saw Suez and KKR come in and try to seize control of our water system. So what have we done since then? One, we banned water privatization. On the ballot, we declared that our water system is an inalienable asset of the city. You can't take it from us.
That's right.
2, we ban tax sales of homes and places of worship. You can't lose your home or your place of worship over an unpaid water bill in Baltimore anymore. And 3, on November 18th, we're going to have final passage of our bill to set up an income-based water affordability plan.
All right.
Yeah. So I think change can happen, and I think it's happening at the local level first.
That's right.
Thank you,
Very good.
Mary.
Very
I
good.
know, so Mary's got to rush out, but I mean, this is, an ongoing conversation, and and it's really important to have the connection relationship you have to communities around the country, and then for us to also be learning from what you're seeing at that level, for us to continue that exchange. So thank you for coming here.
Okay, bye. Bye-bye.
So I wanted to actually, so I don't know if you all have questions for each other or if we have questions from the audience. We have, we do have Danielle Johnson here from Feinberg. I'm sorry. Okay, Danielle from Elizabeth, New Jersey, and they're facing a lead crisis in New Jersey among other.
I can't say that yet.
Okay.
Would you like me to comment?
Yeah.
Hello, I did not expect to be at this table tonight, but I'm happy to be. I'm actually very proud to be included with these women who have been fighting a harder fight for a longer time than I have. My son was lead poisoned in the Ironbound in Newark. We moved there because we could no longer afford to live in Queens. We were trying to make a responsible choice. It turned out to be one of the worst choices of our life. We were there for about 6 months. We took him for his 2-year checkup, and he came back with elevated lead. Now, I am from the Midwest, like these nice ladies, or the South for you, and when there's 10 miles of cornfield between cities, the water systems don't touch. I had no idea that the water systems touched in New Jersey and in New York and all of the other places where you can walk to 3 cities in one day. We moved to Elizabeth to get away from the water in Newark, and then one of the women in Newark that was helping with the water crisis there just made an offhand comment to me. You know that Elizabeth buys water from Newark, right? And when I started looking for that contract, I could not get my hands on it, and that kind of answered the question for me. And it turns out when I finally did get the contract, Elizabeth was buying upwards of 40% of their water from Newark. I have been fighting since I found that contract just to get the city to test the water in Elizabeth. And I believe someone from City Hall put it this way: the mayor said that he will give me no standing. And I don't need standing. I will keep fighting. I've managed to secure independent testing for free for people in Elizabeth. Now it's just getting them to understand that there may actually be a problem. That's what I meant, is I can't say that there's a problem because no one's tested for it. The water company is doing the minimum under the lead and copper rule. That's 54 tests this year they did. But I'm not sure that they're testing tier 1 sites. I'm not sure that they're not flushing the water first. There's so many ways you can game that test, and because they're privatized, I can't Oprah request anything from them. That's New Jersey's version of the Freedom of Information Act. All I want to do is prevent any mother from going through, any family from going through what we have with my son. He is an incredibly bright child. He was incredibly bright as a toddler, and we moved to New Jersey, and we thought he was just creeping up on his terrible twos, and then it got to the point where he was actually expelled from his preschool because they couldn't handle him because he was so aggressive and impulsive. At 2 years old, the lead changed him from a moderately hyper child into just this little ball of rage and impulsivity, and it's taken lots and lots of therapy and doctor's appointments to get him where he is now. He hasn't bit another child in about 4 months, but at the height of it, he was biting 16 or 17 times a day. Lead poisoning for children is really, really real. And it has really devastating consequences. I'm not sure what the effects are on adults. I know that it can cause kidney problems and such. And New Jersey also had an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease. And everyone's saying, well, we don't know where it came from. But if you look at the pattern that they saw, it's the exact same pattern they saw in Flint. It's the pattern it follows when it is the water and not a cooling tower and not some specific source. So I've dove as hard as I can into this, just trying to advocate and hopefully keep another area in New Jersey from having to experience what Flint and Newark is doing.
So we also have with us today Marion Kramer from Highland Park, which is where the water shutoffs began, and you know, Highland Park, one of the, from what I understand, one of the earlier emergency managers also as well. Is that right? Kind of the center.
Benton Harbor.
Yeah. And so it's really been years that that Detroit's been facing this, and we can just see, and Highland Park, you know, is the beginning kind of center of that, and we can see how those lessons have been kind of taken and then applied to other places in the country. So on the other hand, so that's what they're doing, and then we're doing this, right? So we're coming together. We're drawing from the lessons of, you know, what's working in terms of fighting back. What we can learn from Highland Park and Detroit and Flint, and to apply to these other places. And you know, the challenge is to bring it back to Detroit and Flint, where somehow, you know, we're not able to do that. And there are reasons for that. But I wanted to ask if there were other questions, questions for anyone else here with us today, for our panelists and for others who can speak to some of these crises in different parts of the country.
How come they can't change it? How come they can't change the policy, the law, the people? The people are the government. Why can't the people do it? Why can't they take it? It's got to be a way that we can not let the government, the 1%, or corporations and so forth, just run over us. And it's not fair to children. It's not fair to us. And we're paying taxes. And we constantly, the taxes keep going up and everything. And then they step all over us. So why can't we reach out to the people and help them to understand, educate them, and let them know that this is not right? Let me take a first stab at that. Okay. See, part of the problem is we all brought up watching television. And on TV, in Michigan or in Detroit, we have channel 247, usual channels, and we have schools, and they've got a program that they operate in public, parochial, private schools called public education. And they have something called social science, civics, you know, all those books, history, and we read all those things. And after a while, we start to believe that you can vote the President of the United States in office. Okay? And a lot of people believe that today. Even though all of the statistics tell us there's a group over here that really does that. It's not you and it's not me. But we got this history that says America, America, and we got these songs. And we got all of these things that get in our blood and make us feel good. And on the 4th of July, we put a flag out and we wanted to wave and all these things, these historical trappings. And then when we go back and we read history and we read Thomas Jefferson talked about the wonders of the United States of America. Then at night after he got finished writing, he was hooking up with African-American teenagers, making babies, okay? So the daytime he was writing stuff, and at night he was going out the side door. Okay? So we got all these historical trappings. And when you tell people these folks do not care about your life, and folks say, that's not true. That's not true. We say the pipes that handle water, some of them are 100, 150 years of age. We should have been fixed these pipes, and that should be the political will of the country. And people say, we will get to it. The only issue is we've got to vote in the right Democrat, or we got to vote in the right Republican, or we got to vote in the right woman, or we got to vote in the right man. And then we got to vote in the right nationality. And we done gone through all that. All right, we got women, we got men, we got white, we got black. We gonna get what's the one's name from Texas now? We gonna get some Hispanics in there. We going down the list. You know, we got one that's gay running. Hey, he got potential. We got all of these different things that are happening, but it never gets to the bottom line where we ask the people in this room, what is it that will improve your quality of life? And we would pretty much say the same thing. We'd like to sit on our porches at night and be calm. We'd like for bread to start costing $2 for 5 loaves. Huh? We would like every now and then to get a glass of wine. Okay, leave the kids with somebody else. We'd like to go there. Normal things. But we are never given that opportunity because we have this history that tells us America the beautiful, it is the best, and it is our lack of activism, our lack of organizing, our lack of clarity, and our lack of vision that keeps us stupid. The more people we bring to Michigan and show them the kinds of things that are going on, they're all shocked. We live all around the Great Lakes, all of this. We don't have a housing problem in Detroit. We got homeless people with signs that are standing in front of vacant apartment buildings, vacant houses, talking about, I need a place to live. The house is right behind your crazy ass. Get in there. But that's the way we're managed. I can't do that because that might be illegal. But it's legal for you to sleep in a box on a grate. See, we got this thing turned around, and that's because we listen to people that say, this is not a table. This is really a carrot. And I've got a button that says official. And if I say officially, this is a carrot, now what is it? It's a carrot. Huh? Officially, it's a carrot. And that's how they get us nuts, because the things that we need to make our lives, the lives of our children, our families, our neighborhoods nice, we don't make the rules. And the reason we don't make the rules is because we got a lack of activism, a lack of organizing. We refuse to study. We refuse to take a look and visit where other people live so we can figure out what to do. That's why.
If I could play off of what
Go ahead.
So one of the things that I'm struggling with where I'm at is when you have these lower income communities of any color, but specifically of color more often than not, a lot of times, especially for the young families, which my family is a young family, I have a 2- and a 4-year-old, when you are rushing from therapy to doctor's appointments to schools, the system penalizes you just for existing. It's so hard to care. And especially when you have this intergenerational thing going on, I am unique where I live because I haven't lived there my entire life. I lived in a similar community somewhere else, but I have not lived in Elizabeth my entire life like most of the people there. And they say, well, this is the way it's always been done. They've had 2 mayors in 60 years. It's literally the way it's always been done. And it's like, whenever I'm arguing with the school board over special education and how they're not following IDEA's most basic principles, the parents, some of them go, why are you fighting? It's better than when I was a kid. They're doing stuff a little bit, right? And I'm like, but if you go 20 miles away to an upper income white area, what do they have? Everything. What do you go, like, it's so hard to get these people, and like you have them working 2 or 3 jobs or going to welfare appointments that should take a half an hour but take the whole damn day. Going to their kids are getting in trouble at school because their kids have problems that aren't being addressed by the school, and then the school decides, well, you're being too much of a hassle, let me call children's services on you. So now you have child services coming to your house. You have to cook, you have to clean, you have to do all of this with nothing. It's incredibly hard to organize. We don't even give people the basics of life. I believe that there was more organization when life was a little simpler because it could be done. I think now we face, especially families of my generation, and I'm a millennial, my generation has a really hard time because we have so little that we can give, and we don't have an example we can follow. That's why I feel so honored to be here, is I have an example to follow with you guys. But it's so hard to start from nothing and fight against a machine that's been building for at least 2 generations.
Yeah. Yes. Here.
Hold on. We didn't have nothing either. And it took organizing for years. And at one time, even when I know I lived here at one time, there was over 100,000 people in the Welfare Rights Organization. The conditions determine this stuff. And that being that a lot of people are beginning slowly to begin to see what you see and feel it, because these countries are being ran, I mean, the United States being ran by the corporation who's likewise running the government. But we have to find a way still, I don't care. Well, still, how do we begin to have a curriculum that women and men and what have you, everybody ain't going to come at one time. But they got to be educated. How you think this knucklehead got out here? He was educated. The one next to him, the same thing. And we can go on and on. I remember at one time I couldn't get a word out of Squeaky. I'm sorry. I couldn't get a word out of her mouth. But she loved being on the front line. When she would be working at GM, yeah, and making sure she was at those all state welfare rights meetings. We had state meetings then, and you could walk in there sometime and it'd be over 100 people. Now we knew that we could get a lot of them if we had lunches, and I mean those were some damn good dinners we fed them. But they stuck and stayed because we got a plan together. And we didn't love each other in there. Oh, my God, it got heated a lot of time. But we finally began to get some of those women to understand, and men, that you are the foundation of this country.
If it doesn't get heated, then people aren't invested. If people aren't invested, there can't be change. So getting heated is a good thing.
Yeah, you are, and you take them out sometime. Say, let's go to Albany, oh Lord have mercy, New York, which is so far away from here, New York, and let's just sit and listen to and see if these people are doing anything. And I'm not saying go up there and stay, hell no, because that quote that Clara talked about, General Baker learned that from welfare rights. There was welfare rights, not Frankie Jeter, but one of the past presidents that said we got to fight in the streets, in the courts, and what was the legislative, and we sometimes have to fight in all of them at the same time. But you begin to let them know they can learn strategy and attack. Damn it, some of the best organizers are these women, men that don't have nothing. But you won't have nothing to lose, but you got a world to gain. You here tonight. We have to begin to set up more and more education. Look, I wouldn't have been able to stay out here. When you understand who the enemy is,
sometimes we have to pull them back. I know in our office at Welfare Rights, once people began to understand who that enemy is, they're ready to go out punching. We say, wait a minute, wait a minute. But you teach them with everything that you have them over at your house cooking and stuff. Good way to get a meal. Anything, but they got to feel and see that there are leaders. And they've been being beaten down because this system don't need them no more. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to say I don't have any tips on how to organize it because it takes different forms in different situations. But what is optimistic and hopeful is that our whole society is in a resistance mode. All these strikes, these babies that can't even vote out here striking every week to save the world. I was teasing some of our union people. I said, y'all out here trying to save your jobs, and they out here saving the world. So just to put things in perspective, but I'm saying that to say there's a mood and an atmosphere in this country. So even though you may not see results immediately, the whole environment is leaning in your favor for involvement. And that might not be any more than getting started with the, dare I say, presidential campaign. That might be where you got to start. Thank you.
So this is certainly not the end of our conversation. We have a lot of learning to do. We have a lot of exchange to do and a lot of organizing to do. And I just want to thank our panelists and everyone who's here tonight. We can spend some more time together while we still have this room. But I also want to say that, what it means for water to be a human right. If water is a human right, that means it's universal. It means that when one of us, when just one of us doesn't have that right, it stops, it's no longer universal, right? So if just one of us doesn't have our water, none of us, or if just one of us doesn't have water, none of us have a right to water. And so I think we really have to take up these struggles, not because they're for people that we know and love and, who are in Detroit and elsewhere in the country. It's because this is our struggle. And so I just want to thank everyone who's here tonight, who's joining us in this conversation, Danielle, for you.
Can I say something?
Yes, yeah.
So one of the most poignant things to me is that my son is 4, he's turning 5 soon. And this summer I took him to a playground in Newark because Elizabeth borders Newark, and it's a nice place to go. And he finished his bottle of water, and he was really thirsty, and he looked and he said, "Mommy, are we in Newark?" And I said, "Yes." And he's like, "They're gonna get sick," pointing to the fountain that all the other kids were drinking from. And he was right, it was an older brass fountain. And to me, there's nothing more chilling to my soul than to know that my preschooler is afraid of water.
We can got plenty of stories of that in Flint. I don't want to get into it, but the children are afraid of the water is one of the impacts of the crises. A friend of mine that's a substitute teacher was in class one day, and they had these caution tapes and all this across the water fountains. And by the way, the lead and copper rule and those things, they do not require schools to be tested.
I'm very lucky. New Jersey requires it by law.
Well, in Michigan, and federally it's not. Federally it's not. But anyway, so one of the kids had ran over there and turned on the water and drank the water. And one of the other kids ran to, she said, Miss McNeil, she drank some water. She drank some water, Miss McNeil. Oh, she drank the water. But They know, but that's not something they should know.
Yeah, yeah.
They shouldn't be living like that.
That's right.
Afraid of water. Now, this is some of the consequences, and I already told y'all about the high rate, the 10%. So some of the things we fighting for, and there's lawsuits and things going on, but we have learned some lessons, and one of those lessons is don't be sidetracked.
That's right.
And it's so easy to do. We was all hating on Snyder. We wasn't looking at the big picture. We wasn't looking at J.P. Morgan. We wasn't looking at Stidell. We wasn't looking at the rest of these, Wells Fargo. That's who we need to be looking at and figuring out ways to dismantle their power. That's what we got to do.
And you can start with somebody tried to kill your 4-year-old.
Oh, yes.
And you go find some other mothers and say, what are we going to do about this? Because if my 4-year-old has been tainted or something got into his system and I didn't know anything about it, how about your kids? You can start at a welfare office with a sign. Who in here has been drinking the water and maybe it's not right? You can start small.
One of the things that I say to people of a different class, not to mothers, but people who are really pragmatic, who want to know where their tax dollars are going. My son's aid cost the school district $40,000 a year. My son had a Medicaid waiver, and he was going to a therapeutic nursery, and that cost them thousands upon thousands of dollars a year. And they're gonna just his education, let alone his health care, is going to cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars more than it ought to have. And if he didn't have me for a mother, and he didn't have people around him that were as privileged as I am to fight them and say, well, no, he's not a bad kid, he has lead poisoning, he has autism, he has ADHD. If he didn't have me to fight for him like that, then we'd be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to have him in prison in 15 years. And when I say that to people, the minute I say his aid costs $40,000 a year, and that's on top of whatever tuition the state pays just to have him in school, and that's discounting the occupational therapy, the social skills classes he needs, the daily counseling by the school psychologist just to keep him in a preschool classroom. They just went and they're like, and I'm like, this is why we need to spend $5,000 a house to replace lead service lines. Right. This is why we need to pay someone $200,000 to run a water system. It's worth it because you're going to pay it out tenfold for every kid that you poison.
Well, I got some more to say tomorrow.
Thanks everybody for being here. Thank you to everybody who's on our panel and who continues to fight for this fundamental right.
Okay.
They messed with my baby, I got mad.
That's right, you're supposed to get mad. And there's some other mothers out there that's mad too. You go find them.
But I think the main thing is not how much money people save. I think, to me, what I'm seeing and observing is the morality of it. It's the humanity of it. I don't cost this cost $400,000. People do not like children and other people
getting
we